So from the government point of view, we want the private sector, fintechs, banks to do their part to getting into the fintechs ecosystem. And for that, facilitation is what main thing the government is doing.
The hosting this Sri Lanka's first ever FinTech Summit 2025 is not only a corporate sponsorship for HNB. So we believe it's investment in national digital future.
Can Sri Lanka be creating a lot of value in a global ecosystem? I think yes. Our talent focused on the right areas, where we have a competitive advantage, can create a very strong move for Sri Lanka.
Where is Sri Lanka on the fintech curve? Hello, you're with Echelon, and in September 2025, Sri Lanka will host the FinTech Summit. It's an opportunity for stakeholders to get together, discuss the vision, and also understand what challenges lie ahead. And in the studio with us to discuss where Sri Lanka is headed on fintech, we have Eranga Weeraratne, who is the Deputy Minister of the Digital Economy. We have Dr. Hans Wijayasuriya, who is now the Chief Presidential Advisor on the Digital Economy. And we have Damith Pallewatte, who is the Chief Executive of HNB, a commercial bank, and also the host or the chair of the Sri Lanka FinTech Summit. And let me start with you, Minister, right? Can you outline for us how fintechs fit into the ecosystem, economic ecosystem, and why you are focusing on them at this point?
Right. So in Sri Lanka, we have a very good banking infrastructure and banking as service. And the penetration of bank community in Sri Lanka is much higher than the other regional countries if you compare. However, most of the banks are till to date thinking of the traditional lines. So right. It's essential that we to unlock this fintech and going for the 15 billion digital economy in Sri Lanka by 2030, we have to get the innovation in fintechs done in Sri Lanka. And also right. For that, I think there are so many use cases out there in various other countries, especially in India, even Nepal and countries like that. And we can bring all this knowledge that is available in the world to Sri Lanka and get the conversation built up here so that the traditional banking system can gradually or leapfrog into the fintech area.
Right. So by fintech, we are really combining two words here, financial and technology, right? When you say, this will make financial services, I think, more inclusive in a way, right? Can you kind of explain how that benefits the ecosystem?
Yeah. So generally, if you look at most of the businesses that are there in Sri Lanka, especially the SMEs and also MSMEs and the small shop owners, they are very much informal. And those businesses don't have a kind of a credit score or maybe substantial assets to get even the lending kind of facilities. To boom the economic development in the country, it's very much needed a system where the digital credit scoring is available, the micro lending based on those are available, and also the transactions done. Moving away from the cash-based transactions to digital transactions.
Right.
So that one thing is the whole historical records will be available, and also the transactions will be transparent, and it'll effect to reduce the corruption and mismanagement and right. Things like that, as well as it will be much faster and more convenient for day-to-day life of the general public.
Right.
So that's how you should go to.
Damit, let me bring you into the conversation at this point, right? Clearly, if people participate in the digital economy, that's when it can thrive and maybe potentially create the space for fintechs. How important are inclusivity goals? Firstly, before we talk about the fintechs, for the digital economy.
So if you look at cash transactions today, so we have in excess of 1.3 trillion rupees in cash in circulation.
Right.
So that doesn't get into a proper banking channel or a transaction trace. So if you talk about inclusivity matters a lot at the bottom of the pyramid. So those cash transactions, because it doesn't leave a trace of transaction history, so those who use cash, who are engaged in a business creating revenue, has less access to finance. So what does that digital means does is it creates a trace of those transactions and enable them to go and access finance through financial institutions, demonstrating there is a history of cash generation. So that helps a lot in scaling up their businesses.
Right.
So that scale up doesn't happen as long as you cash to yourself and doesn't bring it to the traceable system. So I think these fintechs at different layers helps bringing that traceability into the system, bringing businesses into the banking ecosystem, so which supports scaling up their businesses.
So you look at it from a point of view of a participant. It can be a small business or an individual, right? From their point of view, what accrues to them from becoming a participant in a system where they're using digital currency of some sort?
I think there are multiple benefits of it. First one is that they get access to a very larger, broader ecosystem. So if you do one-on-one cash transactions, your reach is limited to maybe a region, a particular location, or maybe at large, maybe a couple of regions. But if you go digital and connect with the fintech, you get multi-layers of access. So that access and the convenience of collecting cash. So you have assured flow of cash if you go digital. Unlike the good old days, the businesses happen through post-dated checks. But the digital payments are more or less assured. You can do a transaction today, you can get the payments 3 months, it will get. Very little doubt on not receiving it. So in that sense, so you multiply your reach, you assure your cash payments, the collections. So that means you can plan your business, you can plan your growth, you can design your business model to reach a more wider audience. I think that's the benefit they get. Most of the time, they that is not seen. I don't blame them because they had to be explained properly why the digital ecosystem usage is more beneficial than where are they today.
It also makes them more credit worthy, I suppose, when the transaction history is there. I mean, it makes it potentially easier, does it, for financial institutions to understand the scale of their business?
That's the point I'm making, right? So if you leave a trace on your transactions,
Sure.
So if somebody comes to my bank and tell today I do say 100,000 rupee transactions a day, I might ask, can you show me where is the transactions? If you can't show, there is a lack of trust between the transaction. How does that 100,000 generates? But if you show digitally, here these are the payments I received, I made, these are the collections I received, it is more or less established that actually there is a running flow, business model and a revenue generation in that business.
Hans, you have a fairly large remit, I think, in your role with the government. I mean, you are more or less overlooking the digital economy of Sri Lanka in a way. How does fintech or financial technology-led firms fit into this picture? Are they important?
I think if you take the full ambit of the digital economy, one of the core elements of a digital economy is the revenue economy, the digital revenue economy.
Right.
That's the bedrock.
Right.
That is digital transactions, replacement of cash with digital means, and also growing the engagement between citizen and financial institutions in non-cash modalities. So the digital revenue economy is one key component. And of course, around it comes the ICT components, the platform economies like ride-hailing, e-commerce, and then finally the digitization of all industries. So these are the three layers of total definition of a digital economy.
Right.
So the cashless piece, moving transactions to digital, is a core objective. Now, in driving that, you have to look at the entire stack or pile of the financial services sector. At one end, you would have the very solid trust and governance foundation, which I think Sri Lanka is very strong in. And I think we have the central bank and the legislation under which the central bank operates to thank for that. So we have a solid trust governance layer. And in any digital economy, you'll find that it then tapers from solid trust and governance all the way to innovation, agility, and like Deputy Minister just mentioned, bringing in technology and innovation at the front line so that you expand inclusion, expand choice, expand competition, all the way to the consumer. So the fintech's combination of innovation and technology in the financial services space lies at the longer tail of this stack. And they become a very important element of maximizing outreach to inclusion to every segment of the population, introducing newer and newer services, options, innovating with the consumer, ensuring that what the consumer or SME or business requires is delivered by the financial services sector. So ideally, if you are to wave a magic wand, you'll have consistency from one end, i.e. the banking system, all the way to the front end, which would be innovation.
Right. So you're talking about a 3-layer digital economy, right? You have the digital revenue economy at the top layer. Then you have the platforms, the other technology players, and that's what leads to digitization across the economy, right?
That's right.
Is when you're tackling this, how do you approach tackling this? This is like then, ma'am, no, that suggests the challenge is quite vast. Where do you start? Do you start with the top layer? Do you tackle all layers?
There are two mappings. That is the digital economy from an outcome perspective. That's what
Right.
you want to achieve.
Right.
But if you look at the blueprint or roadmap that we need to establish to enable that outcome, then you have to work all the way from connectivity, cloud and storage, the digital public infrastructure such as digital ID, national data exchange, the payment rails themselves, where Sri Lanka is pretty strong, but they need to be open and accessible to fintechs and banks alike. And then using open API microservice type marketplaces for the IT industry, where we are very strong, developers, innovators, fintechs included, to build using the infrastructure that has been put in place, both the hard infrastructure as well as the DPIs. And you're right, I mean, Deputy Minister, the ministry, all the agencies have a phenomenal challenge because we have to do all this in parallel,
Right.
in a very short time frame.
Right.
But I think co-innovation between the strategists, the planners, policymakers, and the industry is key.
I suppose, Deputy Minister, the fact that the government has set out digitization as one of its real core objectives with Sri Lanka's future helps kind of get the attention of everybody concerned to get them around the table, right? But when you're approaching this, and I'm talking necessarily about this first layer here that Hans was referring to, the digital revenue layer, right? Where do you think the current pain points are? Is it legislative? Is it policy? Is it the people that need to, you need to sort of educate them, sort of get them involved in this? What do you think?
I think the issues are with all the 3 areas that you broadly mentioned. Firstly, like from the platform side, there are certain shortcomings where we have to bring the platforms to much user-friendly and more convenience. Also, we have to bring in certain aspects. So if we compare the current services that we have in Sri Lanka, for example, QR code-based payment. certain improvements has to be done so that it will be much competitive compared to the cash-based transactions to the digital-based transactions. Because people don't want to spend waiting for confirmations or transactions to happen. They want to get the transactions done much faster. Therefore, digital payments could be faster, but provided the platforms and everything support that faster transaction modes. So there are certain things that we have to improve in the platform side. Then when it comes to the regulation side, then again it comes about the commission rates, whether the commission to be charged to the customer or to the merchant, and also for QR kind of payments, what is the commission rates going to be? Because now we are trying to move the cash-based society to cashless. So the comparison between the cash transaction to digital transaction always comes to mind for small-time business owners when they move into the digital acceptance of digital payments. Therefore, in many countries, especially in the countries similar to Sri Lanka, what they have adapted is by making it zero cost to the merchants, merchants and to the consumers, so that they don't see a difference in terms of the financial terms adapting digital payments. And also this brings a lot of other benefits by bundling like credit-based micro lending and maybe the lottery kind of services and various other services into digital payments. They somehow managed to move the cash-based transactions to digital-based transactions. So that sort of policy improvements also we have to do.
So you're suggesting with the platforms there's a connectivity challenge, and also there's the cost aspect, right? If you're trying to solve this, right, where do you think the one or two changes that you can do that can help fuel the innovation that Hans is talking about? I suppose the government is not trying to be the innovator here. You're looking for anybody who wants to play in this space, particularly the fintechs, to innovate. What are the one or two things you think that are required to open the scope for innovation?
So from the government point of view, we want the private sector, fintechs, banks to do their part to getting into the fintechs ecosystem. And for that, facilitation is what the government is, main thing the government is doing. At the same time, certain guidance, leaderships, and also certain mandates has to be done from the government side in order to get there. Because having just assistance wouldn't make the service getting adopted by the general public. So for the awareness building, and also government as a catalyst for going for digital payments is something that we are very keenly looking into, starting from the GovTech payments for traffic on the spot traffic fine to the government digital payments, and also even for things like transit cards. We'll actually start adopting digital payments more than what it used to be.
That's very interesting. So you're looking at this as government as a catalyst. What is the problem you're trying to solve there? I mean, you usually think it'll happen the other way, the private sector as a catalyst.
Yeah, because I believe government as a platform, meaning government creates the stage and the basic infrastructure and the agility, which is where government has to change. That is the challenge. By digitizing government, to make government agile as well. So an agile platform where then innovation can take place. Now, I might be provocative in saying this, but I believe that due to how digital platforms seem to have evolved over the last 2 decades, there's a trend of winner takes it all in most areas. You take search, even at global level.
Sure.
You take search or even fintech, take any of the markets. So fintechs eventually get exits, yes, but the survival rate is not very high, because I believe that this space has been allowed to innovate without structure. And combine that with winner takes it all dynamic in digital business because of capital requirements, it results in a fairly, eventually in a big player market. in most markets in the region. But if you adopt a fairly structured approach to this, so let's go to that innovation layer, the last mile. Fintechs, I think there's a lot of innovation space and a lot of fiscal space for fintechs to innovate, survive, grow, if they play to the strengths of specific use cases. So, for example, combining with agri. So there are agri fintechs or around the fisheries industry, various market makers, etc. And within those spaces, there is a business case. There is room for a small player to grow and thrive. But it requires a little bit of structure and guidance from government, from policymakers, so that you create sufficient amount of space, like say cooperative related fintechs, community-based fintechs or agri-based, sector by sector. And then some would survive, some won't, but the survival rate will be much higher. In a disorganized setup, what happens is a fintech has to work all the way up to be able to attract capital and be able to take some part in the bank-led ecosystem.
Right.
It's very painful.
Sure.
That's why I said I'm being provocative, because it goes against the principles of digital innovation, where everybody jumps onto the innovation bandwagon. Exactly. But a little structure, I think, can help. And if you look at the region, you'll find that the fintechs in a disorganized ecosystem, the fintechs who make it all the way to being a neobank or get funded and have scale, the few who make it have originated most often from some killer application, either tolls. So you take Malaysia, touch and go, the toll system. That was the origin of one. Origin of the other was mobile top-up, which is also a killer application. So that there's large transaction volume. Public transportation is another killer application. So those are the scale applications. But my argument is that beyond that, there are a lot of micro use cases, which with a little structure and guidance, the innovation space can be created.
It may be, one could argue that it's obviously these fintechs are entrepreneurial. They will, they tend to succeed because of that spirit they have. But what do they need from the ecosystem to make this happen? Now, if you want many to thrive in very specific areas, solving very specific problems, what are the conditions that you generally need, they will generally need for them to thrive?
So one is, I think, open access to the primary rails, the DPIs.
What do you mean by DPI?
Digital public infrastructure. So the payment rails themselves need to be digital public infrastructure, meaning they need to be open.
Right.
Sri Lanka is, I think, I would go to the extent of saying 80% there.
Okay.
Pretty open, but not fully open.
Right.
Compare with UPI in India,
Sure.
for example, or the ecosystems in Singapore or any of the Southeast Asian countries. We have a little more way to go to fully open. So access to the playing field.
Right.
That's one. I think then proportional regulation is very important, so that if your transaction sizes, if your entity size, if the area in which you play, like I mentioned earlier, if it's use case driven, let's say you're an agri fintech, creating proportional regulation which allows the fintech to grow on almost preferential terms in terms of regulatory space within a constrained environment helps that business to get scale and grow.
So basically, don't treat them like a commercial bank,
Absolutely. Because on the flip side, the risk has to be mitigated by constraining them into that. And it's for their safety and growth constraints as well. So a mix of proportional regulation, context-based regulation, and innovation-friendly, innovation-permissive regulation in a structured manner. But this takes a little bit of thinking by the regulators to carve out all these layers and proportional environments. So one example I can bring from my previous life is that mobile money, for instance. Mobile money was enabled through a proportional regulation, which limited the size of the mobile money account, limited the size of the transaction, frequency of transaction, but relaxed the onboarding process. It's easier to get a mobile money account than to get a bank account. So this is proportional regulation. So likewise, if you apply those principles to a sectoral level or a use case based application, then I think you'll have a more vibrant innovation space.
It's not always that a commercial bank would see itself being at the center of disruption that can also affect how commercial banking is done in the country in general, right? What was the genesis of this for you and for HNB?
So we want to grow through tech. Our vision, we envision growth through technology, because we are a 137-year-old bank. So when you carry legacies, so you tend to look back and understand how we have survived 100 plus years. So the key genes in surviving was adaptation.
Right.
You need to adaptation to the era that you live in. So now it has come. If you are looking at the next 100 years, it is less useful in building brick and mortar and expanding our physical networks. So we need to see how best we can work through digital means, maybe AI, maybe blockchain, maybe various other technologies to serve the customers. The banks, be it private commercial banks or otherwise, so we deliberated that we think they need dual transformation. It's not one-sided transformation that they need. The first one side is they need the transformation in their legacy systems, the core banking systems, to more open API and open infrastructure. The second, the other side of transformation is a more difficult one. They need internal culture transformation, because now the banking is seen as more risk averse, pushing products to customers what the banks have. From that, we need to move from the customer-centric, more agile, convenient facilitation of banking transactions. So that needs a mindset change. So driving that internal culture change and the mindset change is more difficult than changing your infrastructure legacy systems and the open architecture. Right? So if you focus on those two, I think we have invested a lot of money in bringing the technology in. But at the same time, we have started a very rough, tough journey of changing that mindset in HNB. So we have started that journey last year and we have come a long way. And it will take some time as well, because it takes time for people to change. So if we bring that change, so then we will start looking at it differently. So we start looking at our banking business model differently. If I may just bounce off, how can it change practically? Now the products that we promote to the market, it can come in different ways in a technology-driven market. So think about embedded finance. So we can embed our financial services, that is maybe payment options, the credit, the insurance, to platforms like e-commerce, ride-hailing, lifestyle platforms. So then it becomes embedded finance. They don't necessarily come to get a financial service, but through their journey, they avail themselves for a financial service. Then we also can look at banking as a service. We don't necessarily be the touch point to the customer. We can make banking services available to fintechs for them to go and provide their services. Right. So those are the kind of new business models that will emerge. So we need to be privy to those things if we undergo that transformation. So that is why we think this FinTech Summit, which we are planning on 24th and 25th September this year, it's not a one-off event. And I also want to emphasize that it is not just another conference or 1 or 2 day expensive summit. It is going to be an annual event, and the next year event will start from the promises and undertakings and actions that we have set ourselves for the first summit.
Sure.
This year's summit will throw out what are the activities that we will do from this summit to the next summit. If you have a target of nurturing 200 startups, how much we can do in the first year? How much investments we need? So we have ambitions of bringing $500 million investments for the startup ecosystem. How much we can bring during the first year?
Right.
So those are very objective-driven, target-driven milestone that we set for ourselves as the summit organizers. So therefore, I think everybody who become part of this summit, we would like all of them to take responsibility in driving this national agenda. Even though a private bank came forward and said, look here, we want to support this one, obviously with the support of the Ministry of Digital Economy, Sri Lanka FinTech Forum, Ministry of Finance, Central Bank of Sri Lanka as a policymaker and the regulator, we bring all of them together. But at the same time, as participants, we need to be very assertive and take that responsibility and accountability. We drive that agenda.
Sure.
So we are results driven.
Sure.
That's why we are more than happy to participate and take the lead and drive this initiative.
The digital public infrastructure, DPI, that Hans is talking about. I mean, well, one may wonder, who controls this? Is this government policy? Is this the legal regulatory framework? Is there technology platforms that the government control that are part of this? What do you think we are as Sri Lanka? Where are we with digital public infrastructure, Minister? And in a policy perspective, where do you want to take the digital public infrastructure in this country?
So digital public infrastructure has to be purely public. So those must be owned by the government, however, properly regulated, so that it will be the supporting platform for the private sector to build applications, do innovations, and provide the customer service on top of that.
Just clarify this for me. When you say digital public infrastructure, are we referring to computer servers, bandwidth, and that kind of thing, or is there publicly controlled software regulations? What does it consist of?
Yeah, so digital public infrastructure does not generally mean the server, the infrastructure hardware, but at the same time it will include the applications such as digital ID, digital driving license, health databases, and various platforms, even the payments as a platform where the other individuals will develop applications on top of that.
Got it.
So those are called digital public infrastructure. And now, as Dr. Hans mentioned, to unlock this, going for the full digital payments and building that ecosystem, eKYC is something that the country is badly needed. Because currently, getting merchants registered in the traditional way is hindering the whole registration process, and merchants coming on board for digital payments.
Okay, just to jargon bust that, KYC is know your customer, so you need a electronic method of doing the know your customer verifications. That's what you're
That's exactly
right.
what it is. And going for this digital ID will seamlessly bridge that gap.
Right.
So having the digital ID to verify digitally who you are, what you are, and as well as authenticate properly by the merchant, by the system, will enable the eKYC is very much like rapidly and more convenient way to get an open bank accounts in the digital space.
Sure.
So we need the certain regulation, like Dr. Hans mentioned, to proportionately make the KYC capturing and also the extent of the data that captures for that registration process being done, looking at the transaction volume and the transaction values and the volume of businesses. So for small transactions, small volume, certain level of KYC is needed. But for large organization which is currently running millions and billions of transactions, maybe much intensive KYC is needed. So getting into this digital IDs kind of platforms will definitely enable that gap and the bridge. It will bridge going for the building this ecosystem. And in terms of the government side, what we are trying to build is that. So getting the national data exchange, so that all these disconnected systems will come into a common national hub where the exchange of data would be much easier while having a proper regulatory framework. So having data open out without any regulation or security principles will also hinder negatively to the development and the country and the society. So we have to have a proper structure, and that's what the government is.
So when you're talking about the 3 layers that you're tackling, Hans, I suppose the digital public infrastructure is really the foundation on which you're building this whole thing, right? So talk in terms of a fintech perspective, but also look at it from a digitalization, digital economy perspective, right? What's the number one challenge you face in your role, and the deputy minister is likely to face also in his role, because he's overlooking the digital economy? What do you think is the number one challenge to get this? I mean, we talked about infrastructure, we talked about fintechs, etc. What is the number one challenge?
Let me start by saying it's not the tech.
Okay.
Because I think the tech itself, with the right expertise which we have in this country, with assistance we get from external and internal experts, putting the tech together, the digital public infrastructure, like Deputy Minister mentioned, the various building blocks, exchange, ID, digital signatures, etc., payments, is not the problem. It would be the capacity building that is required, the change of mindset across. I think the change of mindset has to be all the way from policymakers through to the user. And I wouldn't say it's a problem, it's a challenge. And to achieve this in a very short time, and we have to take upon ourselves the challenge that we need to prove to, especially the user, the citizen or the SME or the last mile in the ecosystem, we have to prove that digital adds efficiency, reduces time, reduces cost, and that this is a better way.
Makes their life better, and then by that example.
Yes. So, yes, we can call it a problem, but I think it's also on us, right? On all of us to make that proof point very real. I think you can, because over time, as the momentum increases, it's a network effect. So if you create a use case that one entity succeeds with, let's take the fintech space, that creates a viable business model, which then will create more. And provided you're consistent in policy execution, then you get a catalytic effect. And that is how digital systems grow. One brings 4, then that makes it 16, and then it grows. And just to elaborate on the point on digital infrastructure and how it will enable this innovation ecosystem. Let's take just an example. Let's say a fintech innovator builds a model, let's say an AI model, which maps the creditworthiness of say a chicken farmer to some data, some behavioral data around behavioral and also demographic data, that the probability of default reduces along with certain parameters, maybe weather, it could be the feed that is given, the personal behavior patterns of that farmer,
Sure.
etc.
Sure.
So that is the unique capability and innovation advantage of that particular fintech. And that's why I said it's important to pitch problem to solution in a constrained space. Now, in the digital public infrastructure environment, that fintech would be able to access certain elements of data. Some would be public, like weather would be public, soil conditions would be public data. But since that farmer is subscribing to the fintech to obtain some facility, the farmer would give consent through the National Data Exchange for the fintech to draw some data. If the farmer has a vehicle, the chances of default are less. I'm just making it up as I go.
Sure.
So to be able to access that data, his driving record, for example, and all with consent, but through the National Data Exchange. This is just a small example of how a small business could get access to information with consent via its personal data, which they could never have obtained previously. And that would enable the business to apply AI or other technologies to build their. So that's how it pieces together. Now, that might be one small business, multiply it.
Damith, in talking about the digital economy, I mean, we've discussed the digital public infrastructure and eKYC, the kind of catalytic role it can play generally in society. What does this mean in the bigger picture? What does this mean for a bank such as yours?
That gives the much needed access. So if you look at today, if you want to go to 5 banks and open 5 accounts, you need to do KYC 5 times.
5 times.
Right. And it prevents from the needy people accessing the finance the way that they would like to access.
Sure.
Right. So that is where this digital adoption is playing a catalytic role in providing a purpose-driven solution. So I think one of the success factors is we don't want to go far, go to the next door, India, Aadhaar, that enable millions of people to get access to the proper financial systems. I think we need to go fast. We see certain activity as happening and action has been taken. We need to improvise them and facilitate them. So then a country of 22 million people, maybe a productive workforce of 13, 14 million people will get that benefit of being part of the digital economy and contributing to a national production or service economy. So thereby achieving our goals that we have set for ourselves.
Mr. Minister, in terms of adoption, right, people have to feel compelled. What can you, fintech adoption in particular, like that solving potentially that digital revenue economy problem, the one that Hans was first alluding to. What do you think we can learn from what's happened in India, for instance, recently? How that country has become a fintech paradise, right? To the Sri Lankan attempt at digitization of the economy.
Right. So to get to that point, I'll start with about the change and the challenges that the whole industry and the government is facing. Now, the government is starting in a brown field. It's not a green field.
Sure.
Why I'm saying that, the QR code launch has happened about 5-6 years ago.
Sure.
But the adoption is not there yet. And therefore, bringing that same concept, same way won't work. At the same time, there's a perception in the industry, banks, and even at the merchant, this service was there. It didn't give any benefit to maybe the banks, to the merchant, or to the consumer. So changing that perception is another hurdle in going for this digital drive. And of course, like you rightly mentioned, in India, like with UPI, QR-based payment has even gone up to the beggars level, street beggars level, where they hold their QR code through the window, outside the window, so that the people inside the vehicle can, without opening the shutter, they can transfer some money to the beggars.
Right.
And three-wheelers they don't accept cash at all. And they don't have even change to give it back. So that to that level, it has gone into the society. And in India, from the retail payments, like more than 90% are going to the digital means. Whereas in Sri Lanka, we don't have even maybe 5% retail payments done through digital means.
But this happens so fast in India.
That's right.
What can we learn from that?
Yeah. So in one way, like they used the opportunity during the COVID period to drive that. So during the COVID period, because the cash exchange had certain health risk as well as fear from the public, like digital payments, that time got adapted much faster. But it didn't happen to that extent in Sri Lanka. And also nobody wanted to drive that also, other than the digital maybe goods distribution. Go to digital payments from the cash-based payments didn't went much ahead during that period. And also in Sri Lanka, after COVID, many things were discontinued. For example, QR-based full service, pump service was discontinued. Even at customs, the digital the document exchanges and the payments didn't continue, which should have continued. And the payments also, and even the good distribution to a certain extent, such as groceries, have come down after COVID period. So we missed that bus at that time. We are in India, they got the maximum out of that opportunity. And India, of course, the government side has heavily involved in driving this, getting more regulations, even by going to the extent of having the AI-based platforms to analyze the people's individual transaction that they are doing, and coming up with various models for taxation purpose and various other purpose, and driving digital payments and limiting the cash based payments, cash withdrawals, or the cash limiting the amount, putting a threshold to cash values that you can transact in the cash mode. So such like policy levels also, like they have brought in to drive that. So Sri Lanka, we have a very good case study by looking at India. Now, if we compare India to Sri Lanka, of course, they have 1.4 billion population, but at the same time, the literacy level in the whole of society, I think we are much far ahead than India. And also the geography and the connectivity side also, compared to remote areas or the area that the connectivity is less in India, is much greater than what you find in Sri Lanka. So we have the whole capacity in the population as well as the infrastructure side. We have much better environment to drive digital payment. Getting it right and relaunching and get this change mindset is what we have to drive it properly. And like Dr. Hans rightly mentioned, it's not the tech, it's about the managing the change is what we have to do.
Sri Lanka is so slightly late to the party as far as digital economy making lives better is concerned, right? Others have gotten ahead of us. That has impacts on individuals, on small businesses, ability for people to be freer, be more entrepreneurial. So sometimes it may be like a little wishful thinking to think that we can become then a hub, or we can become a center for innovation in these things right now from where we stand. But if we are ambitious, if we are kind of looking out and seeing how we can create globally competitive businesses in this area, is that a realistic vision, Hans, for instance? And how do you reconcile our late start with a big ambition?
I think first, what is a hub? I think the digital world is more ecosystem, and it's important. What is important is to become a valuable node in an ecosystem where you deliver something special into a global scale ecosystem. So that in itself is a mindset change, where again across policy all the way to change management, that you need to start with the belief that you will create more value if you are part of something bigger than keeping things constrained. And this message, I think, needs to go to if you just take our financial services ecosystem, it's something that needs to be ingrained all the way from the banks to the NBFIs to the telcos and the fintechs. Everyone must, I think, have the belief that they can create more value in a cooperative, collaborative ecosystem. So your question, can Sri Lanka be a hub, or let's call it a node, creating a lot of value in a global ecosystem? I think yes. Our talent focused on the right areas where we have a competitive advantage can create a very strong node for Sri Lanka. And here I think a combination of a generic talent, like say, for example, AI talent, which I think Sri Lanka has above average, or it's punching above its weight in this area, but combining it with use cases which have global potential. And fintech would be, I think, one of those areas where there can be sweet spots which can be captured. Is it unrealistic? I don't think so. But we need to be focused, programmatic, in picking the right battles and becoming a regional, if not global, expert in specific areas. Because we spread ourselves thin, we are a small country, small population, it'll be more difficult.
I'll just ask you one more thing about digital IDs. Where is Sri Lanka now on this? I mean, everybody in the ecosystem thinks this will be a major boost to digital adoption if we have a digital ID. Where are we at this point?
So first, to reaffirm what you said, it is the absolutely critical cornerstone of a digital economy, because it gives you the 100% or zero trust authentication mechanism for an individual. And also, we would be issuing digital IDs also for businesses, right, for government institutions, for tourists, for all legal entities which will play in this digital economy. So if you can authenticate someone 100%, it's zero trust, then cashless, paperless, presenceless becomes a reality. And it's a tipping point, like Deputy Minister just mentioned, KYC. Bring digital ID, your KYC issues are gone. Because you can identify 100% and you trust that person. After that, whether they appear digitally or otherwise, 100%. So it's a switch. It's not, having an 80% reliable ID is very different to 100% reliable ID. So that's fundamentally why it will give a boost to especially financial services, because trust is very important, and identity. So it will give a big clip. Where are we now? The RFP for the system implementation has been floated. That's part of the grant from India. And the system implementer or integrator will simply implement the system, lay it out, integrate the pieces like the biometric capture devices and the central servers. And from there on, the Sri Lanka government will be selecting a managed services provider who will run the system. And citizen data will start getting collected after the system integrator has left and a Sri Lankan origin managed service provider takes over the system. So where are we in terms of timelines? I think around April next year, somewhere there, we will be able to start the first data collection.
Right. And then once you start the first data collection, I mean, you'll have a fresh system, it's virtually empty, right? You need all the data to come in, I think, right? What are you expecting to happen, David?
So once the digital ID system is in place, like we'll have to re-register the existing population coming into the digital ID platform. So within 2 years time frame, we are trying, but maximum within 3 years, we should be able to convert the whole existing digital ID of 16 million IDs to digital ID. That's our target. And also going forward, like any ID that will be given out will be on digital mode. And also from the birth, giving the ID that will
Right.
be used for future in the digital ID system, even the tax TIN number and everything. We are looking to get into a common ID platform, and not just person IDs, but at the same time the business IDs, business registration numbers, and everything would be made through the digital mode in the digital ID platform, so that business registration will also have the digital authentication facility. Now, as Dr. Han said, the trust is the paramount in fintechs. So, especially the trust or the authentication that can be done remotely. Now, to the current adoption of fintech services, like people are reluctant to go there because they don't have the trust. There are so much of scams that are happening, sending PIN codes and faking by calling them and getting the PIN codes and trying to expunge the accounts is a huge issue. So we can prevent those things by going for biometrics-based authentication, so that the scams and everything will go down eventually. And unless we get there, getting the mass adoption for fintechs will be always questioned by the public, and they'll have the fear of getting to that system because they don't trust, like Sri Lankan, especially the elder population, still don't trust going for digital means of savings and things like that. They more prefer to keep the cash under the pillow or in an Alameda.
Damith, we are having this conversation in the lead up to the FinTech Summit, right? You're a legacy bank, a traditional bank, a very large one at that, right? How did you end up becoming a catalyst to putting together this FinTech Summit?
So this whole idea of FinTech Summit, we were deliberating for a while. Why it has came up? Because HNB's engagement is bottom of the pyramid layer of the economy is very intense. I would say, if you go outside Western Province, outside Colombo, our presence is very strong. So we work with hundreds of thousands of microfinance level customers, the farmers, the small entrepreneurs. So when you walk through those businesses, we saw a significant gap in access to finance. It has multiple sides. It's not only a bank going and giving a loan, but there has to be an appetite from the other side to participate in that conversation and that transaction. So we have seen the investment in a bigger institution going to those below layers and making the finance available is more costly, making some of the business models not viable. So the best alternative that we have seen is there are small fintechs that can be, moving through these small economies.
Right.
So that will benefit everybody to come in to that ecosystem. Then when we came back and we brainstormed, we have seen there is a gap. We have very scattered fintech ecosystem here. We thought, can't we bring them together to one platform, one ecosystem? Not only the fintechs, can we have a conversation? Can we build a conversation? Fintechs and also bring policymakers to the table. So then there is a fair bit of confidence and the trustworthiness, credibility is created. It's not only few IT people are trying to play around with some technologies, but there is a framework of policies around it. Then we thought, still it is not enough. So we also need to bring investors on top of it. Otherwise, these startups and fintechs can't scale up to serve the requirement that is necessary. So when we brainstormed that, then we saw that gap Sri Lanka has still opportunity to bring all of them together. Then we looked at who have done that in other countries. We didn't go that far. So if you just look at what Singapore has done, Singapore FinTech Summit is a fantastic example. So there is a brilliant example in Singapore itself, which is DBS.
DBS, for background, was a commercial bank in Singapore.
It was a commercial bank, but now I would say it's not a bank. I would say it's a tech company with a banking license.
Right.
That is, it got transformed into. So can we be like that? At least one or two banks in Sri Lanka can become tech companies with a banking license. So it reaches the way that it generates revenue, all that are different to a normal legacy bank. So to do that, then we need to create a platform. Then we design this FinTech Summit. This is how we should work towards that goal. So we thought it's a very nice alignment for a private-public collaboration to bring this national need into the forefront and create that. That's why HNB, as a catalyst of driving technology, we thought we need to host it. The hosting this, the first ever, Sri Lanka's first ever FinTech Summit 2025 is not only a corporate sponsorship for HNB.
Right.
So we believe it's investment in national digital future.
Right.
So we want to embrace that digital adoption, broadening the digital economy, deepening the financial inclusion, bringing the investment community together, and we want to make Sri Lanka a regional innovation hub for fintechs. So to do that, it will be more credible and more palatable if those ecosystems see as a very good private-public partnership.
Right.
So that is the whole objective of bringing this FinTech Summit together. It has 5 key objectives. One is we want to accelerate the digital economy. Other one is we want to at least nurture 200 plus homegrown fintechs through investments. We want to bring regulations, regulators and policymakers to the table. And also we want to boost financial inclusion. We want to bring small tools which can be used at the bottom of the pyramid or wherever it is to bring them to the financial system. So that's a core need. And then we want to boost Sri Lanka as a regional fintech hub. If you bring those 5 core objectives together, I think we have a journey towards 2030, $15 billion digital economy income.
FinTech Summit that is around the corner. From a broad policy perspective, etc., what do you think the objectives are broadly?
Yeah, so FinTech Summit will be a good platform to have all these discussions about what would be the Sri Lanka's future on the FinTech space. So they are like all the Sri Lankan banks, the regulators, the innovators, entrepreneurs, even the school level leaders in research and development, university students, and everybody would come to this platform. And also it will combine with the international players who are in this space, who have vast knowledge in how those countries have adapted and gone into fintech, to have a discussion in a common platform. At the same time, it will enable us to get through a kind of a fintech roadmap for Sri Lanka. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have done QR-based payments. However, we haven't been able to get it successfully adopted. So what should we do in the next 1 year, 2 years to get it to maybe, let's say, 40% of transactions to be done on digital QR-based payments? So that roadmap, we have to clearly identify and educate each and every stakeholder in this whole ecosystem. This is our plan. And get their consent and also get their involvement in making the transfer or changes what is necessary.
Hans, closing thoughts also about the summit.
Yeah, I think just to, Mr. covered it very well. Just to add on, what I would look for in this summit, one thing, I think it's a great platform, builds the narrative, brings all the players to the table. But if you are to look for specific areas of focus, I think one is proportionality from the regulatory side. What are the reg tech or regulatory innovations that can be brought in to enable proportionality so that each layer of this ecosystem can play in a competitive space. Second is interoperability among the players. How are the rails all opened up? And how do banks interoperate with fintechs, vice versa? And how do they collectively build a trust environment? Because end of the day, a citizen at the end of the chain or a small business borrowing from a fintech who has some relationship with a bank who is regulated by the central bank, this chain has to interoperate plus proportional space to play, and the citizen has to be able to trust 100%. Then the system will work. So that those are the two main components, and look forward to also see innovation at the sectoral level. When I say they need be traditional industrial sectors, but they at use case level, where fintechs demonstrate their ability to add value to a particular use case, which the traditional system cannot, and how they would lock into the entire chain.
Just to clarify one thing, you talked about proportionality and interoperability. This is something that you think can be achieved in the current legal regulatory setup?
Yes. Again, going back to the mobile money example of, I remember in my past life, it took 3-4 years to work through that. But there was no new law required.
Right.
It could be a new regulation or a new guideline.
Sure.
But it's a lot of hard work on the part of regulators, policymakers, to create those innovations. And regulatory sandbox is one approach which central bank has already put in place. And I think giving that whole activity a turbo boost, where sandboxes are far more active and more problem solutions are thrown at it, will help.